first time Commander Zethkar of the Veltar Dominion saw a human, he almost laughed. The creature stood barely 2 meters tall, covered in soft pink skin that would tear at the slightest touch. Its limbs were thin, lacking the chitinous armor that protected proper warriors. Most amusing of all, it had only 2 eyes, positioned awkwardly on the front of its skull, creating massive blind spots that any decent predator could exploit. Zethkar's 4 arms flexed as he reviewed the intelligence reports on his command display. The humans called their world Earth, and they had somehow managed to develop faster-than-light travel despite their obvious physical limitations. Their ships were crude, their weapons primitive, and their military structure chaotic compared to the disciplined hierarchies of the Veltar. The Dominion had been expanding across this spiral arm of the galaxy for over 3,000 years. They had encountered countless species, cataloged their strengths and weaknesses, and absorbed the useful ones into their empire while eliminating the rest. It was a simple process, refined through millennia of conquest. Earth would fall within a day. Maybe 2, if the humans proved more stubborn than their pathetic appearance suggested. Zethkar's flagship, the Sovereign's Wrath, led a battle group of 47 vessels toward the small blue world. Long-range scans showed approximately 8 billion humans scattered across the planet's surface, with a modest orbital defense network and a handful of military stations. Their technology was at least 2 centuries behind Veltar standards. "Commander," reported Subleader Vextai from the sensor station, her voice carrying the typical Veltar tone of professional disdain. "Human vessels are moving to intercept. 12 ships, outdated plasma drive systems, armed with what appear to be kinetic projectile weapons." Zethkar's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Kinetic weapons? They're planning to throw rocks at us." The bridge crew shared his laughter. After conquering species with energy shields, quantum torpedoes, and reality-warping defensive systems, facing an enemy that still relied on physical ammunition felt almost insulting. "Maintain formation," Zethkar ordered. "Let them approach. I want to observe their tactics before we demonstrate proper warfare." The human fleet spread out in what the commander recognized as a basic defensive formation. Their ships were boxy, utilitarian things that looked more like cargo haulers than warships. No elegant curves, no intimidating weapon arrays, no psychological warfare elements designed to terrify enemies into surrender. The lead human vessel transmitted on standard galactic frequencies. The translation matrix processed the primitive communication protocols and projected a hologram of the speaker onto Zethkar's command platform. The human was female, based on the intelligence profiles, with brown skin and short black hair. She wore a simple military uniform devoid of the elaborate decoration that proper commanders use to display their authority. Most surprisingly, she looked calm. Not terrified, not desperate, but genuinely calm as she faced a force that could obliterate her entire species. "This is Admiral Chun of Earth Defense Command," the human said. "You are approaching human territory without authorization. State your intentions." Zethkar studied the primitive creature with fascination. She spoke as if she had any authority over beings whose ancestors had been conquering star systems when humans were still figuring out how to make fire. "I am Commander Zethkar of the Veltar Dominion," he replied, allowing the translation system to convey his words in their crude language. "You will surrender immediately and prepare your world for integration into the Dominion. Resistance will result in the total elimination of your species." Admiral Chin's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid that's not acceptable. You have 30 seconds to alter course and leave our system, or we will be forced to defend ourselves." The bridge erupted in chittering laughter. The sound was harsh and alien, like metal scraping against stone, but it conveyed the same meaning across species barriers. "Did she just threaten us?" asked Weapons Coordinator Helvar, his primary arms gesturing in disbelief. "Apparently," Zethkar replied. "I believe this species may have failed to evolve proper fear responses. No matter. Begin the demonstration. Target their lead vessel with a single plasma burst. Minimum power setting. I want them to understand what they're facing. The Sovereign's wrath had weapons systems capable of cracking planets. A minimum power plasma burst would still be enough to vaporize any ship in the human fleet. It was a merciful warning shot, really. The bright green energy beam lanced across space, precisely targeted at the human flagship's center mass. Zethkar expected to see the vessel vanish in a brief flash of superheated vapor. Instead, something impossible happened. The human ship's hull didn't vaporize. The plasma beam struck what appeared to be nothing but simple metal plating and somehow dispersed harmlessly across the surface. No shields flickered, no energy barriers activated. The beam simply stopped. Analysis. Zethkar snapped, his casual amusement replaced by sharp interest. Unknown, Commander, Vextai replied, her sensor tendrils quivering with confusion. The beam made contact but caused no detectable damage. Scanning their hull composition now, the human admiral appeared again on the communication channel. Her calm expression hadn't changed, but now she looked almost sad. I was hoping you would reconsider, she said quietly. For your sake. Before Zethkar could respond, the human fleet opened fire. The first thing that struck him was the sound. Most energy weapons fired silently through the vacuum of space, their deadly beams invisible until they struck their targets. The human weapons made noise that somehow carried through the void itself, deep, rhythmic thunder that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The second thing was the projectiles themselves. They weren't simple kinetic rounds, as the sensors had suggested. Each shot glowed with internal energy, trailing streams of exotic particles that bent space-time around them. As they flew, they seemed to grow larger, more massive, gathering matter and energy from the quantum foam itself. The third thing was their accuracy. Every single shot found its target. The Sovereign's wrath had energy shields rated to deflect stellar radiation. The first human projectile punched through them like they weren't there. The second cracked the primary armor plating. The third penetrated deep into the ship's hull and detonated somewhere near the engine section. Emergency alarms wailed throughout the bridge as damage reports flooded in. Engineering sections were venting atmosphere. Power conduits were overloading. The ship's mighty plasma cannons were offline. Three shots from primitive humans had crippled a Veltar flagship. Return fire. Zitkar raved. All weapons. But his weapons officers were staring at their displays in confusion. Commander, targeting systems are malfunctioning. Every time we lock onto a human vessel, our sensors register impossible readings. What kind of readings? The ships appear to be growing, sir, becoming more massive. Our targeting computers can't maintain a lock on objects that keep changing their fundamental properties. Across the Veltar battle group, similar scenes of confusion and panic were unfolding. The humans continued their steady advance, their weapons firing with mechanical precision. Each shot seemed to carry more force than the last, each impact more devastating. Zethkar had fought against species that could manipulate gravity, bend time, and phase in and out of reality itself. But he had never seen anything like this. The humans weren't using advanced technology. They were somehow making their primitive weapons become more advanced through the simple act of firing them. Commander, Vextai called out, her voice tight with something Zethkar had never heard from a Veltar before, fear. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures emerging from the human homeworld. The tactical display updated to show new contacts rising from Earth's surface. Ships, but unlike the simple boxes of the defending fleet. These vessels were sleek and predatory, bristling with weapons that registered as far beyond anything in the initial intelligence reports. How many? Zethkar asked. Thousands, Commander. And they're accelerating past the speed of light without using any detectable FTL mechanism. The human admiral appeared on the communication channel again. This time, she looked genuinely regretful. I try to warn you, she said. You see, you made a fundamental error in your assessment of humanity. You assumed we fight like you do, for conquest, for territory, for dominance. You thought our weapons were primitive because they appeared simple. More of the new human ships emerged from Earth's gravity well, their impossible acceleration carrying them toward the battle zone. Zethkar could see that each one was different from the others, as if they were being designed and constructed in real time. But humans don't fight for conquest, Admiral Chun continued. We fight for each other, for our families, our children, our future. And when you threaten what we love, we don't just use our weapons. The nearest human ship was now close enough for detailed scans. Zethkar stared at the readings in disbelief. The vessel's hull wasn't made of any recognizable material. Instead, it seemed to be constructed from crystallized emotion, literally hardened determination given physical form. We become our weapons, the Admiral finished. And there is no force in this universe stronger than a human fighting for home. The new human ships opened fire. But these weren't projectile weapons or energy beams. They were firing something that Zethkar's sensors couldn't identify. Streams of pure intent that rewrote the basic laws of physics wherever they struck. A Veltar cruiser simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but erased from reality as if it had never been built. Another found its weapons transforming into flower gardens. A third discovered that its crew had been replaced by children's toys. Retreat, Zethkar ordered, abandoning any pretense of military dignity. Full withdrawal. All ships, emergency jump to the rally point. But the human weapons were somehow preventing FTL travel. The laws of physics themselves seemed to be actively helping humanity while hindering everyone else. As the Sovereign's wrath limped away from Earth at sublight speeds, Zethkar realized something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The humans hadn't been defending their planet with primitive weapons. They had been showing mercy. The simple boxes he had dismissed as cargo haulers were revelation weapons, devices that became more powerful the longer they were needed. The kinetic projectiles were manifestations of human will made tangible. And the fleet emerging from Earth wasn't a military response. It was parental instinct given starship form. Zethkar had spent 3,000 years studying warfare. He understood strategy, tactics, logistics, and morale. He knew how civilizations fell and empires rose. But he had never encountered a species that could turn love into a weapon of mass destruction. As Earth fell away behind them, growing smaller in the Sovereign's wrath's damaged sensors, Zethkar began to understand that humanity's ranking of 2,847th in the galactic database wasn't because they were weak. It was because no one had ever made them truly angry before. The Veltar Dominion had been conquering the galaxy for 3 millennia. They had faced impossible odds and overcome them through superior technology, discipline, and strategic thinking. But they had never faced anything like humans fighting for home. And Zethkar was beginning to suspect that nothing in the universe ever had. The first encounter was over. But as the commander stared at the damage reports flooding his screens and listened to the panic communications from the rest of his fleet, he knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. Humanity had been awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the depths of space, as the Veltar fleet limped toward safety, Earth's new Guardian ships settled into patrol orbits. But they weren't just protecting a planet anymore. They were protecting an idea that had just been born in the heart of human space. The idea that love, when threatened, could rewrite the fundamental laws of reality itself. And across the galaxy, other species who had been watching the confrontation through long-range sensors began to realize something terrifying. If humans could do this to the mighty Veltar Dominion while barely trying, what would they do to those who truly threatened their children? The answer, they were about to discover, was nothing short of miraculous, or apocalyptic depending on which side they chose. 3 weeks after the humiliating retreat from Earth, Zethkar stood before the high command of the Veltar Dominion, his career hanging by a thread thinner than quantum wire. The great hall stretched before him like a cathedral of conquest, its walls decorated with the banners of 3,000 conquered worlds. Each trophy represented a species that had once believed themselves mighty, now reduced to footnotes in Veltar history. Overlord Kreshtai occupied the central throne, his massive form bristling with the ceremonial weapons of office. Around him, the other members of High Command clicked their mandibles in barely concealed disgust as they reviewed Zethkar's battle reports. 17 ships lost. Kreshtai's voice rumbled like grinding stone. 300 crew dead or missing. Our most advanced flagship requiring 6 months of repairs. And you claim this was accomplished by, what did you call them? Primitive kinetic weapons. Zethkar's secondary arms clenched involuntarily. The official reports have been sanitized, stripped of the impossible elements that would have made him sound insane. How could he explain that human weapons had grown stronger through the simple act of being used? How could he describe ships made from crystallized emotion without being declared mentally unfit? The humans employ technology we do not yet understand, he replied carefully. Their weapons systems appear to violate several fundamental laws of physics. Laws of physics, sneered War Master Velthok from his position at the Overlord's right hand. Perhaps you simply encountered a species with superior technology. Did that possibility occur to you before you fled in terror? The words stung because they carried a grain of truth. Zethkar had fled. He had abandoned his post, retreated from a battle that should have been a simple subjugation, and returned to Dominion space with wild tales of impossible weapons and reality-defying tactics. But he had also saved what remained of his fleet from total annihilation. I propose a theory, interjected science leader Nethvar, her analytical tendrils writhing with intellectual curiosity. Perhaps the humans have developed quantum consciousness weaponry, devices that utilize collective belief to alter local space-time parameters. The hall filled with the chittering sounds of Veltar laughter. Quantum consciousness theory was considered fringe science at best, pseudoscience at worst. The idea that sentient thought could directly influence physical reality was the realm of mystics and madmen. Enough, Overlord Kreshtai commanded. Theories and excuses will not restore our reputation. Commander Zethkar, you will return to human space with a proper battle fleet. 200 ships, including 3 planetary bombardment vessels. You will demonstrate that the Veltar Dominion does not retreat from primitive species, regardless of their unusual technological capabilities. Zethkar felt his blood cooling in his veins. 200 ships represented a significant portion of the Dominion's military strength. If his assessment of human capabilities was correct, he would be leading those vessels and their crews to certain destruction. Overlord, he began, I respectfully suggest that we first attempt to understand. Your suggestions, Kreshtai interrupted, have already cost us 1 fleet. You will follow orders, or you will be replaced by someone who will. The threat was clear. Refuse and face execution for cowardice. Accept and face probable death at human hands. Neither option appealed to Zethkar, but at least leading the fleet gave him some chance of survival. And perhaps, if he was clever, a chance to avoid the catastrophe he saw approaching. 2 days later, Zethkar stood on the bridge of the Dominion's Pride, the largest warship in Veltar history. Around him, the assembled battle fleet represented the accumulated military might of 50 systems. Dreadnoughts capable of reducing continents to ash. Destroyers whose weapons could pierce any known defensive system. Support vessels carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds. Any previous enemy would have surrendered at the mere sight of such overwhelming force. But as they approached Earth's solar system, Zethkar found himself wondering if overwhelming force meant anything to a species that could apparently rewrite reality through sheer determination. Long-range sensors are detecting the human defensive perimeter, reported his new sensor officer, a young female named Kawaixtai, who had volunteered for the mission specifically to study human technology. Configuration appears identical to our previous encounter. 12 ships, primitive design, same weapon signatures. Zethkar studied the tactical display with growing unease. The human ships were positioned exactly as they had been 3 weeks ago, as if Admiral Chun had simply ordered her fleet to wait patiently for the Veltar return. "Are they the same ships?" he asked. KYX's tendrils flickered over her instruments. "Negative, Commander. Similar configuration, but different quantum signatures. These appear to be newly constructed vessels." That was interesting. In 3 weeks, the humans had built an entirely new defensive fleet. Either they possessed manufacturing capabilities far beyond what the initial intelligence suggested, or they had been preparing for this confrontation much longer than anyone realized. The communication channel crackled to life, and Admiral Chen's familiar image appeared on the main display. She looked exactly the same as before, but Zethkar noticed something different in her eyes. Not fear or resignation, but something that made his combat instinct scream warnings he couldn't articulate. "Commander Zethkar," she said, her voice carrying a note of genuine sadness. "I was hoping you wouldn't come back." "Admiral Chun," Zethkar replied formally. "I return with orders to secure your species' surrender. The Veltar Dominion offers you one final opportunity to submit peacefully." Chen's expression grew even sadder. "I'm sorry, Commander, but you need to understand something about humanity. The first time you came here, you threatened our home. That was educational. It helped us understand what we were facing." Behind her, Zethkar could see other figures moving on the human ship's bridge. But unlike before, these weren't just military personnel. He could see elderly humans, young ones, even small children working alongside the crew. "But this time," Chen continued, "you came back. You brought more ships, bigger guns, deadlier weapons. Do you know what that tells us?" Zethkar remained silent, though every instinct he possessed was screaming at him to order immediate retreat. "It tells us that you don't just want to conquer us," the human admiral said quietly. "It tells us that you want to own us, to make us into something we're not, to take our children and turn them into versions of you." The tactical display updated as more contacts appeared on the sensors. Not ships rising from Earth this time, but something far more disturbing. The space around the human fleet was beginning to change. The fundamental properties of the vacuum itself were shifting, becoming something denser, more purposeful. And that, Commander, is something no human can tolerate. The transformation began slowly. The 12 human ships started to glow with an internal light that wasn't electromagnetic radiation or plasma energy, but something else entirely. Something that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the sensors could measure. "All ships," Zethkar commanded, abandoning any pretense of diplomatic contact. "Open fire immediately. Target the lead vessel with maximum firepower." The Veltar battle fleet unleashed hell. 200 ships fired simultaneously, their combined firepower sufficient to vaporize small moons. Energy beams, quantum torpedoes, antimatter charges, and exotic matter projectiles all converged on the human flagship. The attack lasted 17 seconds and consumed enough energy to power a star system. When the weapons fire cleared, Admiral Chen's ship was not only undamaged, it was larger. "Impossible," whispered KYXI, her instruments registering readings that violated everything she had been taught about physics. The human fleet was growing, not just in size, but in complexity. Each ship was becoming more than it had been, accumulating mass and energy from sources that didn't exist in normal space-time. And as they grew, they were changing, evolving, becoming something that Zethkar's combat-trained mind couldn't properly process. "The children," Admiral Chen said, her image still clear on the communication channel despite the impossible transformations occurring around her. "You came back because you wanted to take our children." That's when Zethkar noticed the other contacts on his sensors. Millions of them, rising not just from Earth, but from every planet in the solar system. Ships, stations, and structures that definitely hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. "We've been thinking about that," Chun continued conversationally. "Thinking about what kind of species travels across the galaxy to enslave children. What kind of civilization builds its empire on the broken backs of families torn apart. The human ships were no longer recognizable as vessels. They had become something organic, something alive, something that pulsed with the rhythm of massive heartbeats. And they were still growing. We decided, the Admiral said, that such a species doesn't deserve to exist. That's when the real attack began. The humans didn't fire weapons. Instead, they reached out across space with tendrils of pure intention, touching each Veltar ship with something that felt like judgment. And where that touch landed, the magnificent warships of the Dominion began to change. The first transformation was subtle. The Hammer of Conquest found its weapons systems converting themselves into medical equipment. Its crew, trained for battle and violence, discovered that their hands now only knew how to heal. The destroyer Payne's Edge watched its hull armor become translucent, revealing the frightened beings inside. Its crew found themselves compelled to sing lullabies in languages they had never learned. The dreadnought worlds and simply sat motionless in space as its crews experienced every moment of suffering they had ever inflicted on others, compressed into a single instant of perfect, overwhelming empathy. "What are you doing to us?" Zethkar demanded, watching his magnificent battle fleet transform into something he couldn't understand. "Teaching," Admiral Chen replied simply. "You see, Commander, the first time you came here, you underestimated us because you thought we were weak. That was a tactical error. This time, you underestimated us because you thought we were kind." Around the human solar system, space itself was beginning to take sides. Asteroids were aligning themselves into defensive patterns. The local star was burning brighter, its radiation somehow focused and directed to support the human fleet. Even the quantum foam was crystallizing into structures that looked disturbingly like nurseries and playgrounds. "Both were mistakes," Chen continued. "Humans are not weak. And when you threaten our children, we are definitely not kind." The Dominion's pride shuddered as something touched its hull. Not weapons fire or energy beams, but something far more dangerous: understanding. Suddenly, every member of Zethkar's crew could feel the terror of the children who had been torn from their families on 1,000 conquered worlds. They could experience the grief of parents who had watched their young ones taken as slaves or trophies. And they could feel the burning, implacable love that was driving humanity to reshape the very structure of reality itself. "Please," Zethkar whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his crew weeping for crimes they had never really understood before. "I know," Admiral Chen said gently. "It hurts to really see what you've been doing, doesn't it? But this is necessary. You need to understand that humanity fights differently than other species." The human fleet was no longer contained within the solar system. Ships made of crystallized parental love were spreading outward at speeds that made faster-than-light travel look sluggish. And wherever they went, they were carrying a message that would be impossible to ignore or misunderstand. "We don't fight for territory or resources or glory," the Admiral explained as reality continued to bend around her words. "We fight for the right of every child in the galaxy to grow up safe and loved." Zethkar realized with growing horror that the human ships weren't heading back toward Veltar space. They were heading everywhere, spreading out across the galaxy like seeds of transformation, carrying their impossible weapons and their terrifying mercy to every star system where children have been taken from their families. "And now that you've shown us how many children are suffering out there," Chun concluded, "we can't unsee it. We can't ignore it. We can't let it continue." The last thing Zethkar saw before his ship completed its transformation into a mobile sanctuary for rescued children was the sight of Earth itself beginning to move. Not through space, but through the fundamental dimensions of reality, becoming something more than a planet. Becoming a promise that no child, anywhere in the galaxy, would ever again be torn from loving arms by those who saw suffering as acceptable. And as the Dominion's pride began its new mission of healing the wounds the Veltar had inflicted across 1,000 worlds, Zethkar finally understood the truth about humanity's ranking in the galactic database. They weren't ranked low because they were weak. They were ranked low because ranking systems were designed to measure military power, technological advancement, and strategic capability. No one had thought to create a category for species that could weaponize love itself. But now, as human ships spread across the galaxy like antibodies in a vast organism, every civilization would learn what the Veltar had discovered too late. Some things are worth more than conquest, more powerful than weapons, and more dangerous than any military force ever assembled. And when you threaten those things, humans don't just go to war. They go to work. And their work, Zethkar was beginning to understand, was making sure that every sentient being in the galaxy got to experience the one thing that the Veltar Dominion had never been able to provide: a childhood filled with love, safety, and the absolute certainty that someone would always be there to protect them, even if that someone had to rewrite the laws of physics to do it. The second battle was over. But the real war, the war for the soul of the galaxy, was just beginning. And humanity, as always, was fighting not for conquest, but for home. The difference, as every species in the galaxy was about to learn, was everything. 6 months after the second human encounter, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. Zethkar stood on the observation deck of what had once been the Dominion's pride, watching as his former flagship completed another rescue operation. The vessel bore no resemblance to its original military configuration. Instead of weapons arrays, it carried healing chambers. Instead of troop compartments, it housed gardens where rescued children could play safely while they waited to be reunited with their families. The ship's hull had become organic, living metal that pulsed with a gentle heartbeat. Its corridors hummed with lullabies that adapted themselves to the native music of whatever species currently needed comfort. And its crew, once proud Veltar warriors, now spent their days learning to braid hair, tell bedtime stories, and master the 1,000 small skills needed to care for traumatized young ones. The transformation had been absolute and completely voluntary. That was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of humanity's impossible war. They hadn't conquered the Veltar Dominion through force or threats. They had simply shown every member of Zethkar's species what their empire actually looked like through the eyes of its victims. The revelation had been devastating. Commander called Vextai from her new position as Chief Comfort Officer. Her once sharp mandibles had softened, her chitinous armor replaced by gentle fabric that wouldn't frighten small children. We're receiving distress signals from the Helix sector. Multiple civilian transports under attack by Karthak raiders. Zethkar nodded, his own transformation still feeling strange after 6 months. Where once he had worn the elaborate ceremonial armor of a Veltar commander, he now dressed in simple clothes designed for durability and comfort. His weapons had been replaced by medical scanners and emergency supplies. The change had begun the moment the human ships had touched his fleet with their impossible empathy weapons. One instant, he had been a proud warrior of a conquering empire. The next, he had felt the terror of a child watching her parents dragged away by Veltar soldiers. The experience had broken something in him, something that had needed to be broken. Set course for the Helix sector, he ordered. Emergency speed. The ship responded instantly, its hybrid human Veltar drive systems propelling them through space at velocities that should have been impossible. But impossibility, Zethkar had learned, was rapidly becoming a relative concept. As they traveled, he reviewed the intelligence reports that had been filtering in from across the galaxy. The transformation was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Human ships, carrying their weapons of crystallized compassion, had reached every major star system within the first month. Their message was simple, devastating, and impossible to ignore. Children mattered more than conquest. Species after species was discovering that their military might meant nothing against beings who could turn aggression into protective instinct with a touch. The proud Zephyrian Empire had dissolved overnight when their warrior caste experienced what it felt like to be an orphan child on the streets of their capital. The Mechanical Collective had rewritten its core programming after their artificial intelligences were exposed to the concept of unconditional love. Even the dreaded Karthak, spacefaring raiders who had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, were beginning to change. Their latest raids had involved kidnapping children, but only to deliver them to safety zones where they could receive proper care and education. Approaching the distress beacon, Vextai reported as they dropped out of FTL near a small moon. Multiple contacts. Looks like a refugee convoy being pursued by. Commander, these aren't typical Karthak ships. Zethkar studied the tactical display with growing confusion. The pursuing vessels had the basic configuration of Karthak raiders, but something was different. Their hulls gleamed with an organic sheen similar to his own ship, and their weapon signatures were completely unfamiliar. Open communication channels, he ordered. The main display activated, showing the bridge of the lead Karthak vessel. But instead of the scarred, violent warriors Zethkar expected, he saw a creature that looked like a cross between a Karthak raider and a concerned parent. The being's natural armor plating had been polished to a gentle shine, and its multiple eyes held an expression of focused determination that was somehow both alien and completely familiar. "This is Pack Leader Grexthy of the Karthak Protection Fleet," the creature announced in heavily accented but perfectly understandable Standard Galactic. "We are pursuing refugee vessels that have exceeded safe passenger capacity. We must redistribute passengers to prevent structural failure and life support emergencies." Zethkar stared at the display in disbelief. The Karthak were offering help? "This is Commander Zethkar," he replied carefully. "What is the nature of the emergency?" "Human children on board lead vessel are experiencing acceleration sickness," Grexther explained with obvious concern. "Our medical teams have new treatments developed specifically for cross-species physiology. We must transfer patients immediately." Through ship sensors, Zethkar could see that the Karthak fleet had deployed what appeared to be mobile hospitals rather than weapon systems. Their boarding craft were fitted with medical equipment and staffed with beings whose body language spoke of professional medical concern rather than predatory aggression. "Vextai," he said quietly, "scan the Karthak ships for weapon signatures." "Already done, Commander," she replied, her voice filled with the same disbelief he felt. "No weapons detected. Their ships have been completely reconfigured for search and rescue operations. They're running humanitarian missions." The transformation of the Karthak represented something unprecedented in galactic history. These are beings whose entire culture had been built around raiding and violence. Their language had 17 different words for types of suffering, but no word for compassion or mercy. Their children were taught to fight before they could properly walk. And yet, somehow the human influence had reached even them. Pack Leader Grex, the Zethkar, said, "This is highly unusual behavior for Karthak forces." Grex's expression became puzzled, as if the question itself was strange. "Of course it is unusual. Before the Great Understanding, we were confused. We thought strength meant causing pain. We thought survival meant taking from others. The Great Understanding. That's what the affected species were calling their encounters with human empathy weapons. But now we see truth," Grextha continued. "Strength means protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Survival means ensuring all children have chance to grow into strong, kind adults. Karthak are very strong. Therefore, Karthak must be very protective." Zethkar found himself nodding in agreement. The logic was flawless, even if the transformation it represented was impossible to explain in conventional terms. "Request permission to coordinate medical response," Grextha added. "Your ship has better trauma facilities for mammalian species. Ours are designed for insectoid physiology." What followed was perhaps the strangest military operation in galactic history. Former enemies worked together with perfect coordination to provide medical care for civilians. Karthak medics, once feared across the galaxy for their expertise in causing pain, proved equally skilled at alleviating it. Veltar medical technology, originally designed to keep conquered populations healthy enough for labor, had been seamlessly adapted for pediatric care. As they worked, Zethkar found himself talking with Grextha about the changes they had both experienced. The pack leader described the moment when human ships had arrived in Karthak space, not with weapons or demands, but with images. Pictures of children playing safely, videos of families sharing meals together. Simple documentation of what life looked like when it was built around love rather than fear. "We try to fight," Grexter explained as they watched their crews work together to stabilize a young Altarian who had been separated from her parents. Traditional Karthak response to intrusion. But how do you fight against beings who respond to violence by asking if you need a hug? Zethkar understood completely. The human approach to conflict was unlike anything in military doctrine. They didn't seek to defeat their enemies. They sought to heal them. "The humans never attacked us directly," the pack leader continued. "Instead, they surrounded our raiding fleets and began caring for us, bringing us food when we were hungry, repairing our ships when they were damaged, offering medical aid when we were injured." The effectiveness of the strategy had been absolute. How could a warrior culture maintain its aggression when their enemies kept rescuing their wounded? "Most confusing was when they started bringing us children," Grex added. "Not as slaves or hostages, but as, what is human word, guests. They would arrive with young Karthak who had been orphaned in raids, well-fed and healthy and happy, asking if we wanted to meet them." Zethkar could imagine the devastating effect such an approach would have on a culture that defined itself through violence. Confronted with the children their raids had orphaned, but seeing those children healthy and loved rather than broken and fearful, the Karthak would have been forced to confront the true consequences of their actions. "Everything changed when the children started calling us uncle," Grex concluded quietly. "Suddenly, every raid became impossible. How could we attack ships that might contain someone's beloved child? How could we take supplies that might be needed to feed hungry young ones?" The medical operation continued for several hours, and by its conclusion, the refugee convoy was not only healthy, but significantly better supplied than when they had started. The Karthak had shared their food reserves. The Veltar had provided spare parts for aging ship systems, and both species had offered to escort the refugees to their destination. As the Dominion's pride prepared to depart, Zethkar realized that he had just witnessed something historically significant. Natural enemies had worked together seamlessly, their cooperation made possible by a shared understanding that transcended traditional political or military boundaries. "Commander," Vextai reported, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command." Admiral Chin's familiar face appeared on the display, but she looked older than she had 6 months ago. The stress of managing a galaxy-wide transformation was clearly taking its toll. "Commander Zethkar," she said with evident relief. "Thank goodness. We need your help with a situation that's developed in the core worlds." "Of course, Admiral. What is the nature of the crisis?" Chin's expression became grim. "The Ethereal Collective has made contact. They're not responding well to our methods." Zethkar felt his transformed physiology react with something between excitement and dread. The Ethereal Collective was perhaps the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, beings of pure energy who existed partially outside normal space-time. If humanity's empathy weapons were ineffective against them, they're demanding immediate cessation of what they call emotional contamination, Chen continued. They've threatened to quarantine the entire galaxy to prevent the spread of what they consider a dangerous psychological virus. The implications hit Zethkar like a physical blow. The Ethereals possess technology capable of isolating entire star clusters from the rest of the universe. If they decided that human compassion represented a threat to galactic stability, they could effectively end the transformation by cutting off affected systems from each other. "What do they want?" he asked. "A demonstration," Admiral Chen replied. "They want to observe our methods directly to determine whether we represent an evolutionary advancement or a dangerous anomaly. The problem is they've specifically requested that the demonstration involve their greatest fear, which is..." Chen's expression became almost apologetic. "Physical embodiment. They want to understand how emotions affect beings trapped in material bodies. So they're asking us to help them become temporarily corporeal. Zethkar understood immediately why Admiral Chun looked so concerned. The ethereal collective had transcended physical form eons ago, viewing material existence as a primitive and painful state. Asking them to take on flesh was like asking a cosmic entity to experience mortality. It was also exactly the kind of challenge that humans would find irresistible. "When do we begin?" Zethkar asked. "Immediately," Chen replied. "And, Commander, this isn't just about convincing the ethereals. Every species in the galaxy is watching. If we fail here, if we can't demonstrate that compassion is compatible with advanced civilization, then everything we've accomplished might be lost." As the Dominion's pride changed course for the core worlds, Zethkar found himself contemplating the magnitude of what humanity had attempted. They hadn't just started a war against cruelty and oppression. They had initiated a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization defined strength, success, and progress. And now they faced their greatest test, proving that love wasn't just a weapon against evil, but a foundation upon which truly advanced societies could be built. The outcome would determine not just the future of humanity, but the future of every child in the galaxy. And as Zethkar watched the stars stream past at impossible speeds, he realized that he wouldn't want to be anywhere else when that future was decided. The universe was about to learn whether transcendence and compassion could coexist. And for the sake of every young life that had ever needed protection, he hoped the answer would be yes. The core worlds had always existed at the intersection of impossibility and inevitability. Here, where the galaxy's spiral arms converged, space-time itself was different, thicker, more responsive to conscious thought, more willing to bend the fundamental laws of physics for beings advanced enough to ask politely. Zethkar stood on the observation deck of the Dominion's Pride, watching as they approached the rendezvous point Admiral Chun had specified. Around them, representatives from hundreds of species had gathered to witness what many were calling the most important diplomatic contact in galactic history. The ethereal collective's vessels were unlike anything else in known space. They existed primarily as geometric patterns of crystallized thought, their forms shifting and flowing according to the mental states of their occupants. Today, those patterns seemed unusually stable, frozen in configurations that spoke of focused attention and careful analysis. "Commander," Vextai reported from her station, "the human fleet has arrived." On the tactical display, Earth's ships appeared as bright points of warm light against the cosmic darkness. But these weren't the reality-warping weapons of war that had transformed the galaxy over the past 6 months. Instead, they were vessels of an entirely different nature, ships designed not for battle, but for the delicate work of bridging the gap between radically different forms of existence. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the communication screen, her expression showing the weight of responsibility she carried. "Commander Zethkar, thank you for coming. The ethereals have agreed to manifest physical forms for this demonstration, but they've never attempted anything like this before. What exactly will we be demonstrating?" Zethkar asked. "Parenthood," Chen replied simply. "The ethereals want to understand how physical beings can form emotional bonds strong enough to rewrite reality. They've agreed to temporarily take on material forms and experience what it means to care for children who exist in corporeal bodies." The implications were staggering. The ethereal collective had evolved beyond physical form millions of years ago. To them, matter was a primitive constraint, emotion was an inefficient processing error, and the concept of vulnerability was almost incomprehensible. "They've never had children?" Zethkar asked. "They reproduce through intellectual synthesis," Chen explained. "New individuals are created by combining the knowledge patterns of multiple existing entities. The concept of small, helpless beings who require protection and nurturing is completely alien to them." A new voice joined the conversation, speaking in harmonics that seemed to bypass the translation matrix and communicate directly with the listener's consciousness. Greetings, material entities. I am the one you may call Prime Synthesis. I speak for the collective in this matter. On the display, a pattern of light began to coalesce into something resembling a physical form. The process was clearly difficult for the ethereal, and the resulting avatar flickered uncertainly between states of matter and energy. We have observed your species' transformation of galactic civilization with interest, Prime Synthesis continued. Your methods appear to violate several fundamental principles of advanced existence. Emotional attachment leads to inefficiency. Physical vulnerability creates unnecessary risk. Protective instincts limit rational decision-making. Admiral Chen nodded respectfully. That's one perspective. But we found that those same qualities can become sources of strength rather than weakness. Demonstrate this claim, the ethereal commanded. We have created physical avatars for this purpose. Show us how material beings achieve the impossible through emotional attachment. What happened next was perhaps the most extraordinary diplomatic exchange in galactic history. The human fleet deployed what appeared to be a small space station, its design combining advanced technology with an unmistakably domestic architecture. Windows showed comfortable living spaces. Garden sections displayed carefully maintained play areas. Everything about the structure spoke of home rather than laboratory. We've prepared temporary quarters for your avatars, Admiral Chen explained. The demonstration will last approximately one standard week. During that time, you'll be caring for children from various species who have volunteered to participate in this exchange. Prime Synthesis's avatar flickered with what might have been uncertainty. Caring for? We do not understand this term in the physical context. You'll learn, Chen said gently. That's the point. The transfer of the ethereal avatars to the human station was accomplished with extraordinary care. Each energy being had crafted a physical form based on their understanding of optimal biological design. Tall, graceful figures with perfectly symmetrical features and no apparent weaknesses or inefficiencies. They looked beautiful, alien, and completely unprepared for what they were about to experience. Zethkar watched through remote sensors as the first ethereal avatar met their assigned charge. A young human girl named Sarah, who had volunteered along with her parents for this unprecedented exchange. The child was perhaps 5 years old, with a bright curiosity and boundless energy that characterized her species at that age. "Hello," Sarah said, approaching the towering ethereal without fear. "Are you my new friend?" Prime Synthesis's avatar looked down at the small figure with visible confusion. "I am a transcendent energy being temporarily manifest in physical form for the purposes of diplomatic study. I do not require friendship." Sarah considered this for a moment, then reached out and took the ethereal's perfectly crafted hand in her small, imperfect one. "Okay, do you want to see my pictures?" The transformation began immediately. Zethkar had experienced the human empathy effect firsthand, but watching it work on beings who had evolved beyond physical sensation was extraordinary. The moment Sarah's hand touched the ethereal avatar, something changed in Prime Synthesis's expression. The perfect symmetry faltered. The flawless features became more natural, more vulnerable. What is this sensation?" Prime Synthesis whispered. "That's what it feels like when someone trusts you," Admiral Chen explained over the communication channel. "Sarah isn't afraid of you. She believes you'll keep her safe." The little girl was already pulling the bewildered ethereal toward a play area where her drawings were displayed. "This one is my family," she explained, pointing to a colorful picture made with wax crayons. "That's my mommy, that's my daddy, and that's my little brother Tommy." "Why do you create visual representations of biological relatives?" Prime Synthesis asked, clearly struggling to understand. "Because I love them," Sarah replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the universe. "Don't you have pictures of your family?" Around the station, similar scenes were playing out as other ethereal avatars encountered children from dozens of different species. Each interaction was being carefully monitored and broadcast to the assembled fleets, creating a real-time demonstration of humanity's most powerful discovery, that vulnerability and strength were not opposites, but partners in the deepest and most transformative experiences possible. By the second day, the changes in the ethereal avatars were dramatic. Their perfect features had softened into expressions of genuine emotion. Their flawless movements had become more natural, more protective, as they learned to anticipate the needs of small beings who could be hurt by sharp corners or dangerous objects. Prime Synthesis, in particular, had undergone an extraordinary transformation. The being who had once existed as pure intellectual force was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, helping Sarah build a tower out of colored blocks while explaining the mathematical principles behind structural engineering in terms a 5-year-old could understand. The foundation must be wider than the superstructure, Prime Synthesis explained patiently as Sarah added another block to their construction. This distributes weight more efficiently. Like how my daddy holds me when I'm scared, Sarah asked. He makes himself bigger, so I feel safer. Prime Synthesis paused, the block halfway to the tower. Something profound was happening in the avatar's expression, a dawning understanding that transcended intellectual analysis. Yes, the ethereal whispered. Exactly like that. That night, Zethkar watched as the station's internal sensors recorded the ethereal's first experience with a bedtime ritual. These beings who had transcended sleep eons ago found themselves sitting beside small beds, telling stories, singing lullabies, and experiencing the strange miracle of watching consciousness fade peacefully into dreams. Prime Synthesis sat beside Sarah's bed, reading from a book about brave princesses and friendly dragons. The ethereal's voice had changed over the past 2 days, becoming warmer, more musical, more naturally suited to comforting young ears. "Will you be here when I wake up?" Sarah asked sleepily. "I will be here," Prime Synthesis promised, and Zethkar realized that something fundamental had changed in the ethereal's voice. This wasn't the detached politeness of diplomatic contact. This was the absolute commitment of someone who had discovered they would do anything to keep a promise made to a child. By the 4th day, the transformation was complete. The ethereal avatars had evolved beyond their original perfect designs into something more complex, more beautiful, more real. They moved with the careful awareness of beings who understood that their actions could cause joy or suffering. They spoke with the gentle authority of those who had learned to balance truth with kindness. And they had begun to demonstrate the impossible. Prime Synthesis was teaching Sarah to manipulate quantum fields through play, showing her how thoughts could influence probability when guided by love rather than force. Another ethereal, caring for a young Veltar child, had discovered how to use harmonic resonance to accelerate healing in organic tissues. A third had learned to create matter from pure energy by focusing on what a hungry child needed rather than what physics said was possible. "You see," Admiral Chun explained to the assembled fleet commanders, "this is what humans discovered about the universe. Consciousness isn't separate from physical reality. Love isn't just an emotion. When you care about something deeply enough, when you're willing to sacrifice everything to protect what matters most, you don't just break the laws of physics. You rewrite them." The demonstration reached its climax on the 7th day, when a genuine emergency tested everything the ethereals had learned. Sarah, exploring the station with her characteristic fearlessness, managed to activate a maintenance hatch that led directly into space. Without atmospheric containment, she had perhaps 30 seconds to live. Prime Synthesis reacted instantly, not with the perfect efficiency of an energy being, but with the desperate love of a being who could not bear to lose someone precious. The ethereal's avatar reached through solid matter, wrapped the child in a protective field generated from pure parental instinct, and pulled her to safety. The impossible had become possible through the simple act of caring. In the aftermath, as Prime Synthesis held the shaken but unharmed child, the assembled representatives of the galaxy witnessed something that would be remembered for millions of years, a transcendent being experiencing the full emotional spectrum of corporeal existence, from terror through relief to overwhelming love. And discovering that these weren't weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths to be celebrated. Now I understand, Prime Synthesis said quietly, speaking not to the diplomatic assembly but to Sarah herself. Now I understand why you rewrite reality. It's not about power. It's about making sure everyone gets to grow up safe and loved. The child nodded gravely, as if this were something she had always known. Will you come visit me on Earth? She asked. I will visit you everywhere, Prime Synthesis promised. The collective has much work to do now that we understand what transcendence really means. As the week concluded and the ethereal avatars prepared to return to energy form, they carried with them something unprecedented in their species' history, the memory of what it felt like to love someone more than themselves. And with that memory came a new understanding of human methods that had seemed impossible just days before. The transformation is approved, Prime Synthesis announced to the assembled fleets. What humans have discovered is not contamination, but evolution. Love is not weakness, but the foundation of true advancement. The collective will support the galactic reformation. But the ethereal made one more announcement that surprised everyone. Some of us will remain in physical form to ensure that no child in the galaxy ever again faces danger alone. As the various fleets prepared to depart, carrying news of humanity's success to every corner of the galaxy, Zethkar reflected on what he had witnessed. The universe's most advanced civilization had discovered that their transcendence was incomplete. They had evolved beyond physical limitation, but had never learned the most important lesson of all, that some things were worth being vulnerable for. Now they knew, and the galaxy would never be the same. The fourth phase of humanity's impossible war was complete. They had proven that love wasn't just compatible with advancement, it was the prerequisite for true transcendence. And as Sarah waved goodbye to her new friends from the station's observation deck, unaware that she had just helped transform the fundamental nature of galactic civilization, the universe took another step toward becoming the kind of place where every child could grow up knowing they were precious beyond measure. The revolution continued, but now it had allies who existed partially outside space and time itself, and for any remaining forces of oppression in the galaxy that would prove to be a problem they had no idea how to solve. 1 year after first contact with humanity, Zethkar stood in the central plaza of what had once been the Veltar capital world, watching children play games that would have been impossible before the Great Understanding. The plaza itself defied conventional physics. Where once there had been monuments to conquest and domination, reality now bent itself into playground equipment that adapted to the needs of whatever child approached it. Swing sets that adjusted their height automatically. Slides that modified their surface tension to be perfectly safe regardless of the species using them. Sandbox areas where matter could be shaped through imagination alone. But the most remarkable sight was the children themselves. Human youngsters played alongside juvenile Veltar, their laughter harmonizing with the chittering songs of young Karthak. Ethereal children, a concept that hadn't existed until 6 months ago, flickered between energy and matter as they learned to experience joy in both states simultaneously. This was what victory looked like, Zethkar realized. Not conquered territories or subjugated populations, but playgrounds where the young of former enemies could discover they were actually friends. Beautiful sight, isn't it? Said a familiar voice. Zethkar turned to see Admiral Chen approaching, though she wore civilian clothes rather than military uniform. Like many humans involved in the galactic transformation, she had transitioned from military command to what humans called community development, the complex work of helping entire civilizations learn to build societies around love rather than fear. Admiral, Zethkar acknowledged. I didn't expect to see you here. Please call me Elena, Chen replied, settling beside him on a bench that helpfully adjusted its configuration to accommodate both human and Veltar physiology. I'm not an admiral anymore. These days I'm what you might call a coordinator. Coordinating what? Elena gestured toward the playground, where a group of children from 6 different species were working together to build something that looked like a castle made of crystallized light and solidified music. The next phase, she said simply, we've accomplished the immediate goal, ending the systematic oppression of children across the galaxy. But now we face a more complex challenge, helping everyone learn to live in a universe where love is the fundamental force rather than competition. Zethkar nodded, understanding the magnitude of the task. The transformation hadn't been uniform across all species or all worlds. Some civilizations had adapted quickly, embracing the new paradigm with enthusiasm. Others struggled with concepts that challenged millions of years of evolutionary programming. The Kronar hegemony is still causing problems, Elena continued, her expression becoming more serious. They've retreated to the galactic rim, claiming that emotional attachment is a form of mental illness that needs to be quarantined. Zethkar had heard the reports. The Kronar were perhaps the most militaristic species in the galaxy, their entire culture built around the concept that empathy was weakness and that survival required the elimination of all potential threats. They had responded to humanity's transformation campaign by declaring war on the concept of love itself. They're not entirely wrong, Elena admitted. What we've done to the galaxy is a form of infection, if you look at it from their perspective. We've introduced ideas that spread from mind to mind, changing how entire civilizations think about strength, success, and survival. Are you having doubts? Zethkar asked, surprised by the Admiral's admission. No, Elena said firmly. But I understand why some species find our methods terrifying. We've fundamentally altered the basic operating principles of galactic civilization. That kind of change always creates resistance. In the playground, the Castle of Light and music was nearing completion. The children working on it had unconsciously formed a circle around their creation, each contributing something unique to the structure. A young human girl was providing the architectural imagination. A Veltar child was weaving the support matrix. A Karthak youngster was composing the harmonic frequencies that gave the structure its musical foundation. And at the center, coordinating all their efforts with gentle guidance, was an ethereal child whose very existence represented the impossible made manifest. The Kronar have demanded a final confrontation, Elena said quietly. They want to prove that their way, strength through dominance, survival through competition, is superior to what they call our weakness doctrine. Zethkar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the pleasant afternoon air. What kind of confrontation? They've challenged us to meet them at the nexus point, Elena replied. They claim they have a weapon capable of severing the emotional connections that bind our alliance together. They want to prove that when faced with true danger, our compassion will crumble and reveal itself as the illusion they believe it to be. The nexus point was a region of space where multiple black holes created a gravitational maelstrom that defied navigation. It had been used throughout galactic history as a neutral meeting ground precisely because its dangers forced all participants to focus on survival rather than politics. When Zethkar asked, 3 days from now, Elena said. And here's the thing, Zethkar, they might be right. What we've built is based on trust, cooperation, and mutual care. Those are powerful forces, but they've never been tested against someone who's found a way to weaponize despair. That evening, Zethkar found himself aboard the Dominion's Pride once again, but this time as part of a very different kind of fleet. Ships from hundreds of worlds had gathered in response to Elena's call, but these weren't military vessels in any conventional sense. They were community ships, family ships, vessels designed around the principle that the greatest strength came from beings who had something precious to protect. The human vessels, as always, defied easy categorization. Some appeared to be made of crystallized hope. Others seemed to be constructed from the laughter of children given physical form. A few existed primarily as manifestations of parental love so intense that it had achieved independent existence. But Alongside them were ships that represented the transformation of the galaxy's other great civilizations. Ethereal vessels that flickered between dimensions, their occupants having learned that transcendence meant embracing rather than escaping the full spectrum of existence. Karthak warships that had been converted into mobile medical facilities. Veltar dreadnoughts that now served as traveling schools and playgrounds. And at the center of the fleet, impossibly, was a ship that hadn't existed until moments after Elena had issued her call for volunteers. It had been built not by engineers or shipwrights, but by the collective determination of every parent in the galaxy who refused to let their children live in a universe ruled by fear. The vessel had no name because it transcended the need for individual identity. It simply was in the same way that love simply was undeniable, inexplicable, and absolutely real. All ships. Elena's voice came over the communication network as they approached the nexus point. Remember why we're here. We're not fighting against the Kronar. We're fighting for the right of every child in the galaxy to grow up in a universe where kindness is stronger than cruelty. The Kronar fleet was waiting for them at the designated coordinates, and Zethkar had to admit they were an impressive sight. These were vessels built for war and nothing else, their hulls bristling with weapons designed to cause maximum suffering. Their very presence seemed to darken the space around them, creating fields of despair that pressed against the minds of anyone who came too close. But the most disturbing thing about the Kronar ships was their silence. No communication attempts, no demands for surrender. They simply waited, as patient and inexorable as death itself. This is Admiral Elena Chun of the Galactic Community Alliance. Elena broadcast on all frequencies. We've come to discuss your concerns about the transformation of galactic civilization. The response came not as words, but as a wave of pure negation that struck the community fleet like a physical blow. It was despair given form, hopelessness made manifest, the absolute conviction that all effort was meaningless and all love was illusion. Several ships in the fleet immediately began to withdraw, their crews overwhelmed by the psychological assault. But for every vessel that retreated, two more moved forward to fill the gap. The fleet contracted, tightened, each ship drawing strength from those around it. You see, came the Kronar response, transmitted through the wave of despair itself. Your alliance crumbles when faced with truth. Love is temporary. Pain is eternal. Only strength survives. But Elena's reply came not through communication systems, but through something far more direct. Every parent in the fleet simultaneously thought of their children, their hopes, their dreams, their absolute determination to create a better future. That thought became a weapon more powerful than anything in the Kronar arsenal, a force that didn't destroy the despair, but transformed it. Where the wave of negation struck the transformed thoughts, it became something else entirely. The hopelessness became determination. The despair became protective fury. The conviction that love was an illusion became absolute proof that love was the only truth that mattered. The Kronar fleet suddenly found itself surrounded not by enemies, but by every parent who had ever stayed up all night caring for a sick child, by every teacher who had ever helped a student understand a difficult concept, by every friend who had ever offered comfort in times of loss. You're right, Elena said, her voice carrying across space with impossible clarity. Pain is eternal, but so is love. And at the heart of the Kronar flagship, their leader experienced something that shattered every assumption their species had built their civilization around, the memory of being a child who had once believed the universe could be kind. The transformation was absolute and irreversible. The Kronar fleet didn't surrender. Surrender implied that they remained separate from those who had defeated them. Instead, they joined, becoming part of something larger than themselves for the first time in their species' history. As the combined fleets began their journey back towards civilized space, Zethkar found himself standing once again on the observation deck of the Dominion's Pride, watching ships that had been instruments of war transform themselves into vessels of hope. It's finished, Isn't it? He asked Elena, who had come aboard to coordinate the integration of the former Kronar forces. This phase is finished, she agreed. But there's so much more to do. We've proven that love is stronger than fear, but now we need to build a galaxy where that truth is self-evident.